Time to go over here and talk to Elena, our press reviewer. She's talking about Macky Sall, elected president of Senegal. How have the press there reacted to that one?
Well, Abdoulaye Wade's conceding defeat came a bit late last night for the papers there to react, but have a look at this article in L'Observateur. They say it was actually the people who didn't vote in the first round that made this victory for Macky Sall possible, because mathematically, if you'd added up all the people who'd voted for Wade and his allies in the first round compared to those who'd voted for the opposition, you'd expect it to be pretty tight, whereas it looks like Sall has actually won a huge victory. But the paper explains that by saying more than half, 52% of voters didn't vote in the first round, whereas turnout was up to 70% in the second round. So obviously all those people were motivated to come out in the second round and vote against their long-standing incumbent president. They also say voters in expat places like here in Paris, where there was a big turnout, also played a major role. There was a big campaign to get voters out here, and it worked. Lots of people did vote, and overwhelmingly against Wade. So that's interesting. If we look at the state newspaper Le Soleil, they're analysing who Macky Sall actually is and what he plans to do. They do point out he's not perhaps the most radical break, because he was very close to the outgoing president for a lot of years before turning to the opposition movement. But they say his promise to try and improve social justice in Senegal, make society fairer and improve ordinary people's spending power.
Now, staying in Africa, situation still confused as well in Mali after last week's coup. What light are the papers shedding on that one?
Well, Jeune Afrique magazine dedicates a special issue to trying to explain what's going on in Mali today. They say that, of course, this rebellion, this coup that seems to have taken place last week, was originally started by soldiers who were unhappy at their situation when they're trying to fight a Tuareg rebellion in the north of the country, which the now seemingly deposed President Amadou Touré said was completely under control. They were demoralised, they felt that it wasn't, so they started this coup. Now, why is that internationally important? The magazine explains that it's because those Tuareg rebel groups are linked to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, who are already accused of having taken advantage of the power vacuum in the Sahara after Gaddafi was deposed from power to sort of gain strength, which means they could be more and more of a danger for the West. The Independent is looking at this today as well. They've headlined the editorial, "Why We Need to Talk About Mali." They say it might seem like a small country in the middle of nowhere that most independent readers might not be able to place on a map, but it is important, not only because the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb might gain strength there, but also because the international community has some responsibility, they say, because this coup probably wouldn't have happened if the Tuareg rebellion there hadn't grown in strength. It's grown because, in large part, of fighters that were once in Gaddafi's army in Libya, who have, if you like, fled south back to their own homelands in the sub-Saharan region after he fell from power. So the international community that pushed Gaddafi out needs to take responsibility for the spreading consequences, the Independent says.
Elena's going to take us to the US now. Supreme Court making a hugely political decision this week about whether Obama's Healthcare Act is constitutional or not. What are the papers saying about that one?
Well, the New York Times turns its focus on the lobby groups that are camping out outside the Supreme Court, holding rallies, occupying TV plateaus, trying to attract the attention of the judges to change their decision. And there's a whole range of different people there, of course. There's liberal groups who are in favour of the Healthcare Act. There's healthcare companies who, of course, will lose some of their profits if this isn't deemed unconstitutional. So they very much want it to be thrown out. There's Catholic groups, religious groups, of course, who don't like the Act because it provides some funding for abortion and contraception. So there's a whole range of people. And what the New York Times says it's questionable whether any of that lobby group activity will actually change the way the Supreme Court makes its decisions. But there's an interesting piece in the Washington Post that explains why one might be opposed, because it's hard for us in Europe to understand what might be so bad about universal healthcare, isn't it? But they explain effectively that it's not just healthcare companies who profit from it or religious groups who are opposed to this act. It's also a lot of Americans who say they don't want to be forced to buy a product. Essentially, that's what this is. It's a financial product that the Obama administration is forcing people to buy. And they also say in that Washington Post piece that it's unfair for young people on low wages who are probably in quite good health and are unlikely to cost very much money in healthcare to then force them to buy expensive health insurance. On the other side of that debate, though, there's a piece in the Huffington Post saying that all women especially should be hugely thankful to Obama for this act, because it's wiped out the discrimination that could exist before, where women were charged more than men for their health insurance.
Elena, thanks very much. There's Elena Casas here every day with the international papers here on France 24.